Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I'm Terry Savage, outgoing president of the Society for Health Communication and a vice president at WestAT. WestAT is pleased to host today's webinar sponsored by the Society and presented by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Now I'll turn it over to the Society's Vice President, Michael Grilla.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to WestAT for its generous hosting of today's webinar and its support. Welcome, everybody, and greetings from a frigid but sunny day in New York City. I hope you're all staying healthy and well. My name is Michael Grilla. I'm the Vice President of the Society for Health Communication, and I'm also the Head of Reputation and Social Impact for Avokind, which is a health communications agency. The Society is delighted to be partnering with the FDA and their colleagues today to discuss their experience and insights on developing youth public education campaigns in the digital era. Very briefly, I'm going to share some background on the Society and go through a few just really quick housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get going. So Tony, if you wouldn't mind. Perfect, thank you so much. So the Society for Health Communication was established in 2016 to help unite professionals from across the field of health communication. We're nearly 4,000 members and growing, working to share resources, exchange best practices, and advance the evidence base of the field. Individual membership is free, plug. So if you're not already, I encourage you to sign up and gain continued access to events just like this one. Our executive team includes Terry, who you just heard from, myself, and Shelley Spaeth and Diane Brodalski. Go to the next slide, Tony. So just as I mentioned, a couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. The slides and the recording will be available soon on the Society website. I know folks are always curious to get the slides, so just know that we will be sending those out along with the recording in the next week or so. The chat function is open for conversation and connection, and we encourage you to use that. But please know that all questions for the panelists must be submitted through the Q&A function. So there's two different tabs on there. There's the chat, there's the Q&A. Please make sure you use the Q&A for any questions. We'll be actively monitoring the Q&A function to bubble up any questions towards the end, but we will not be closely monitoring the chat for questions. We also have the closed captioning function on, I believe. So for those who need it, you should be able to access that. And now we'll introduce our panelists. So moderating today's discussion is Jem Benoza, who serves as the Division Director for Public Health and Education with FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. She leads the development of culturally tailored public education efforts to prevent and reduce the harm of tobacco products among diverse audiences, including through the Real Cost campaign that we'll be discussing today. Next is Benji D'Agostino, Media Strategy Director at Initiative Agency, who works closely with the Center for Tobacco Products team to identify actionable audience insights and develop communication strategies in support of their public health education campaigns. Joined with them is Suzanne Santiago, EVP and Director of Business Leadership at FCB New York, a full-service advertising and communications agency. Suzanne has more than 15 years experience developing large-scale public health campaigns with a special emphasis on youth. She's currently the integrated team leader for FCB's contract with the FDA, partnering with the Center for Tobacco Products on their tobacco education campaigns, including the Real Cost campaign. Next up is Maribel Gual, a health communications specialist in the Division of Public Health and Education and FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, where she leads efforts to improve understanding of digital media's ability to promote behavior change. She's also managed multiple youth tobacco prevention campaigns, including Fresh Empire, a campaign for hip hop youth, and our topic at hand, the Real Cost campaign. And finally, we have Dr. Liz Petron-Sayers, a social scientist with FDA's Center for Tobacco Products Office of Health Communication and Education's Division of Research and Evaluation. That's a mouthful. She will be helping bubble up questions in the Q&A. So she'll be joining us a little bit later, but we'll be watching for any questions you submit through there. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jem.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that introduction. And on behalf of the panelists, we also want to thank the Society for Health Communications for giving us the opportunity to share some of our challenges, lessons learned and insights. We hope it's helpful in your everyday work. And we also hope it generates a lot of ideas and discussion. At the FDA, our public education efforts primarily focus on us reaching teens and youth. Our goal is to reduce and prevent the harms that come from using multiple tobacco products. Since this is a kind of a virtual room of other health communication professionals, I know we share many similar challenges that some of our colleagues in the commercial world do not. For instance, we know tobacco is a low interest category. We don't imagine our everyday teen is really proactively searching or waiting for the latest tobacco information. We also know that our user journey is different without sales or cash registers. So the journey is much more opaque. Today, the webinar is going to focus on a challenge that the FDA has really been focusing on for the last few years, and that's the rapidly changing media environment and how to truly become a digital first campaign, particularly because our charge is to reach today's youth. We know this challenge is very large, so we're going to take little components of it, but we're not going to be able to touch upon every single aspect of it. Back in 2013, the FDA launched its first public education campaign. The Real Cost was designed to reach teens who were still open to using cigarettes. Back then, we had a proven formula, we were able to implement it, and it worked. The center of that media plan really did focus on broadcast TV, and digital and media were add-ons or supplementary. Today, we feel like that is the opposite. We cannot reach enough teens if we focused only on broadcast TV. So today, we're going to start with Benji, who's our media guru. His presentation could go all day, and he's going to squeeze it into 10 minutes. Then Suzanne and Maribel are going to go into a couple of digital challenges and then talk about specific approaches we've been using to really make digital first come to life. At the end of the presentations, we'll ask all the panelists to come back. We will begin with some of the questions you submitted during the registration process and take Q&A that Liz will be monitoring in the Q&A box. And let us begin with Benji.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Jen. So we're going to get started by doing a kind of an overall high level. As Jen mentioned, this could go on all day. We're going to give you guys an overview of the media landscape, particular to teens today. Go to the next slide. So something to note about today's youth is that they were born in a digital age. Teens have never been this digitally or virtually connected as they are today. They're continuing to find new ways to connect, as well as new devices to connect to. So if you look on the left here, we have some device ownership. It's worth noting that less than 1% of this teen audience that we're talking about today have access to these devices. So, most of them, 99% of them do have access to at least one of these digital devices, which lets us know that they do have a little bit more accessibility versus something like a TV or more linear traditional platforms. Something else we also know about teens is that they are always online. 74% of Gen Z spends their free time online. This is really what they're doing when they're not working or, working in school, part-time jobs, whatever it might be. Social and online social media is very, very much integral to their days. 66% of Gen Z uses more than one internet device at one time. So you can imagine as they're streaming on Hulu or whatever it might be, they're also watching things on their phone. And so some things we're definitely going to talk about today and some big platforms we'll talk about, and you'll see weaved throughout the entire discussion, is going to be about streaming audio. You're going to see stuff about streaming gaming and then also streaming video, which are really, really prevalent among teens today. You go to the next slide. And so the events of 2020, everything that has happened last year, years before in this COVID time period that we're living in, we've seen these trends of linear declining happening way before COVID hit. So, linear TV before COVID-19 had a continued decade-long double-digit rating decline among teens and Gen Z. That's when we started to see online video shifting up, YouTube really becoming king among mass teen audiences, with a lot of them spending more and more time integrating or, interacting with the content that's available through online or digital methods. What we saw during COVID is that all consumption across all platforms increased. including linear TV. So teens were watching more TV just on every channel and every platform. However, the true winners were definitely the more streaming platforms, things like TikTok, online video, where video is being watched live, especially on Instagram, was also very much prevalent after COVID, or in this time period that we're existing in right now. And then you could go to the next slide. And so as you can see, based on this pretty robust chart, 77% of their time, this is looking at average weekly share of time spent, is spent on these digital platforms such as desktop streaming, mobile streaming. We also have included things like gaming console streaming here as well. You can see over the years, starting from 2014, the live TV, that light blue chunk, 23% now, is taking up less and less of their time throughout the weeks. Go to the next slide. And so the issue here is that teen networks and linear TV networks can no longer guarantee ratings against this teen demo. So as you can see, based on the median ages that we've listed here, things like MTV, things like other very notable teen TV networks that we traditionally would lean on to reach teens are now skewing much, much, much older. For example, MTV has a median age of 45. So what was once, the real prime network for teens to kind of get their content from has really shifted towards this younger streaming audience. As you can see with streaming, we see a lot of a younger median with a lot more 18 to 34 participation as well. You can go to the next slide.
Benji, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Rather than just watching through linear methods, they're watching content through a ton of different ways through digital. So here we have an example. It's not that the teens today aren't watching The Simpsons, they're just watching it differently. They're choosing to watch it through on-demand methods, through mobile methods, through streaming methods. So we have a couple of different figures here to really show you how the impact is still very much large, especially on digital, and with content such as The Simpsons, which is very much drawing in teen audiences. And so with so many different ways, and this is something that Suzanne and Maribel are going to spend a lot of time talking about today when we talk about challenges when we're in the digital platform, there's really different ways that we connect and reach teens. So there's very high-reaching platforms, services, and devices such as Hulu, Roku, HBO Max. There's things like display or search that are also very effective at reaching and getting in the eyeballs of teens. However, there's also social platforms such as TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, Reddit. There's all of these content areas that teens are engaging with on social that really give marketers and people who have a public message to put out a really good place to connect with teens and engage with teens through the content that they care about. And so that's where we see the best kind of places to reach and connect with teens. These platforms that I have listed here, such as YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and Spotify, have really risen to the top over the last 2 years. We see YouTube, 47% of Gen Z say YouTube is their favorite platform. It's really becoming a place where they can connect with influencers, but also connect with other peer-posted content as well. We see an increasingly amount of time spent on YouTube, either listening to things, watching things, and engaging with influencers as well. We also, many of you have probably heard about TikTok within the last year, especially with all of these viral trends that are happening. We know that there's so much time being spent with teens on this platform, and this is really the biggest platform for teens today. We also know with gaming and Twitch, there's so much with the time spent that teens are spending in gaming that they're also watching gaming content, on their desktop. They're viewing people, they're watching people play the game rather than just playing it themselves. And then lastly, Spotify, we know in their spare time, they love to just stream audio as well. And so now I'm going to hand it off to the team, Maribel and Suzanne, who are going to talk about some of the digital challenges we also face and how we can address them and how we've addressed them in the past.
Thanks, Benji. You can go to the next slide. So as Benji really effectively laid out, the media landscape has changed a great deal in the last 10 plus years. But of course, at FDA, we wondered, well, what does that mean for our youth tobacco prevention campaigns? So back in 2014, when we launched our first campaign, The Real Cost, broadcast television featured very heavily in our paid media plans. We followed recommended best practices for reach and frequency, and we did that to great success. Our outcome evaluation showed that we prevented 587,000 teens from initiating smoking cigarettes. However, today in 2022, just a short 8 years later, we've realized that our campaigns have had to shift their paid media efforts to reflect this changing media landscape. And if we really wanted to reach our teens, our target audience, and meet them where they are, we had to be where they are, and that's on digital media. You can go to the next slide. So I want to acknowledge that this slide is very crowded, but that's the point. It's really reflective of how crowded the digital landscape is. It's cluttered and it's competitive. It seems that there are infinite numbers of apps and platforms for teens to engage in, and there are just as many, if not more, advertisers vying for their attention. But one benefit actually of this competitive landscape is that we're able to more efficiently, we're able to achieve higher reach and frequency on digital at more efficient rates than we were able to on broadcast television. Of course, that also means that reach and frequency on broadcast television are not one-to-one with the reach and frequency on digital. Another consequence of this very crowded landscape is that the environment has just become very fragmented. So it may become harder to find your audience and to reach your audience, especially in a few centrally located places. And so, as a result, we don't have necessarily the same shared cultural moments. So whereas a teen in the 90s might know it's Friday night, 8 p.m., I'm going to log on to ABC to catch up on, catch up with my favorite teen couple, Corey and Topanga. Today, teens could be on any number of places online on a given Friday evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to talk about this first challenge. Just how do we find our audience? And once we do, how do we reach them?
Thanks, Maribel. As Maribel just shared, the number of media choices in 2022 is almost infinite. And as a short time ago as 3-4 years ago, we would have been able to actually see the logos on that chart. It was crowded, but actually we would have been able to read those logos. But what this means is that, so it seems like while reaching our target through media is seemingly easy, reaching them meaningfully has never been more difficult and challenging. Next slide. Compounding the challenge even further is that teens can now curate and personalize their own digital experiences. Today, every teen's experience in digital is actually different. So what you're looking at is actually a media slide. They're now active participants in media consumption instead of simply selecting media, sitting back and experiencing it exactly the way everybody else does. So for instance, teens are using Snapchat very often to engage with filters and lenses that are then leveraged on other social platforms completely. And they no longer look at universally published content on websites, say it's 17.com, for fashion and beauty advice. They only refer to their favorite influencer on Instagram or TikTok. Teens don't even need to experience gaming in a uniform manner anymore or environment. For instance, many teens play Fortnite, and they play regularly through their game console, in their bedroom, in their basement. But some are playing vicariously through influencers on Twitch. And some may have only tuned into Fortnite this summer to check out the Ariana Grande themed concert and gameplay moment. So what this means for us in the campaign is that the real cost needs to consistently and aggressively adapt to the changing teen behavior on an ongoing basis. So instead of seeing just videos in digital, you'll now see that we have TRC Snapchat filters and lenses that illustrate and convey tobacco messaging. You'll find beauty influencers across social who are talking about the cosmetic consequences of smoking in their feeds. And more, we look to integrate into gaming environments and even digital virtual events that are more and more engaged with our teen audience. Next slide. The most important, if I didn't scare you enough with that media slide, the most important thing that we do to keep on trend is to leverage data at all times. So long gone are the days of relying on Nielsen data and a tracking study alone. We continually refer to research from every available research, whether that's third-party resources like a ComScore, like a Nielsen. We then pair that with audience and engagement data of each individual platform, which does get updated very regularly. And then on top of that, we layer on qualitative insights, whether we've received those qualitative insights through recent focus groups or social media or trends analysis. And then we also delve deeply to identify out of that crowd of unrecognizable logos, not only where we need to be, but when we need to be there. So what our research has shown, and again, this is not one piece of research, this is research on top of research, but what we have found is that teen mornings are really filled catching up on their social media and listening to music. What happened last night while I was sleeping? With mobile phones, tablets, laptops, media consumption now continues throughout the school day. During breaks, they turn to mobile gaming, YouTube, especially these past few years of remote school. The consumption pattern of teens during midday has definitely gone up. So I hope it might be reflected in their grades. Who knows? Late into evening and afternoon is where they start consuming that longer form content. It's filled with gaming, it's filled with streaming videos. And yes, you'll notice there's definitely still some TV, but it's incredibly selective. And then of course, before they hit the hay, they're gonna check out the social feeds and make sure that they're up to date before calling it a day. Next slide. As the landscape also changes so rapidly, we no longer review and optimize our media choices year to year. We can't. We have to re-examine, we have to optimize on a quarterly basis, if not more often. And it forces us to constantly be going back to the basics and go back to all data available. As this chart particularly illustrates, we look not only at how much reach a media vehicle may have, but we also want to keep tabs on how much time they're engaging and spending on the platform, because that all affects the probability of our ads and our content being seen and engaged with. We consistently, and Benji helps us do this, we consistently review targeting policies of our platforms. They change more often than we'd like. So for instance, on Facebook and Instagram, we can target youth based on age. We can target them on gender. We can even target them on location. For instance, we have geo-targeted in 2019, before the epidemic, we geo-targeted every single high school in America, so that we knew we were getting kids while they were at school and while they might be in danger or susceptible for vaping. Whereas then you have YouTube and Google. We need YouTube and Google, but they don't allow ad targeting based on age. So in that case, we need to be incredibly specific to the content that we run against and run within. We need to lean more heavily on passion points of our at-risk youth, and we lean more into contextual targeting. For example, we tend to run more health consequences messaging within ESPN content, or cosmetic consequences in beauty content. We also need to keep track of how are kids using the platform. Again, Snapchat filters, right? What are the new innovations on each individual platform, and how can we best take advantage of them? And then most importantly, what are the metrics we're looking at for guidance and how have our ads performed against those metrics so we can optimize in real time. Next slide. But addressing the media challenge isn't always achieved, or isn't only achieved rather, based on media choice and optimization. We need to tailor our creative and message to the platform. So from a messaging perspective, we all know we're in health communications, that in order to change behavior, especially a health behavior, it is so important that we be frequent, but we also need to be consistent. So that's obviously posed some challenges and has required some flexibility. In this example, we are educating on the fact that if you vape, you could be inhaling toxic metals into your lungs. In a 15-second video with continuous action, teens are likely to give you more time to deliver the message. You can have a voiceover, you can have an added caption for emphasis, and even give some greater detail. Like in this example, we've used the inclusion of some of the scary metals. However, in a quick social post, you need to include a message and caption form. Chances are sound is off. And if the visual is interesting and arresting enough, they'll certainly give you a few seconds to read, but you have to be short. And then a 6-second video, the hardest, most challenging one of them all. We got to hustle. We got to give our message short, sweet, upfront, and let them move on to what it is that they were there to be doing in the first place. But I'd be remiss if I didn't also talk about that there are significant creative and production considerations that need to be made as well. So as you can see, all of these ads are being shown on a phone because the abundance of our media buy is consumed by teens on their phones. So it has led to a very significant creative evolution from just a few years ago in 2 significant ways. One, first and foremost, we develop our creative to be seen on a small screen, and that was not always the case at all. Video with large expanses of background and scenery is produced less often in favor of closer up, simpler shots to really drive that emotional connection and drive home our message. And secondly, we produce creative that works both horizontally as well as vertically, based on consumption variations. So for instance, most teens will consume content vertically on social, yet on YouTube, based on what they're watching, it may be vertical, it may be horizontal. So if a piece of creative is being made for cross-platform use, we pay very special attention and give consideration to how we're framing shots on location, especially when it's live video. So to wrap up, the challenge of reaching teens in this fractured media environment is met through detailed and flexible media planning based on data, as well as creative and messaging flexibility so that we're mirroring the behavior of our teen audience. So I'm going to hand it over to Maribel again to speak more on that topic in challenge number 2.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think we can go to the next slide. I don't know if the slide is just frozen on my end, but I can't see it moving forward.
It's frozen on my end too.
Okay. Well, I can dive in and hopefully the slides will catch up. I don't know if we need to X out of the slide deck and maybe restart it again. Okay, well, I'll just keep going on. So Suzanne just described, some of the different approaches we take to reach our audience. But once we've figured out where they are and once we've found a way to reach them, there's also then the question of how do we ensure that we can capture their attention long enough to actually deliver a message? This question is especially important for us at FDA because our ultimate goal for our campaigns is behavior change. We want to prevent our youth audiences from using tobacco, excuse me. In order to do this, though, we know that we have to change their knowledge, attitudes, and their beliefs around tobacco use. And so working backwards, in order to do that, we know that they have to process a message. And in order to process a message, they have to first pay attention to that message. So it's really an important foundational requirement for our work. That being said, attention is very hard to capture for many different reasons, including just sheer volume of ads. There are some estimates that show consumers receive between 4,000 and 10,000 ads a day. Skipping ads is also a factor to consider. I think it's pretty safe to say that if given the option, a teen or even any of us, if given the option to skip an ad, that ad will very likely be skipped. Now, even if there is the option to skip an ad after a partial first view, so after 6 seconds, it's very likely that our teen is watching that countdown go from 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 to 1. And the moment that they have the chance to skip the ad, they are. So that really brings up the question of, even if they're watching those first 6 seconds and more, and potentially some additional change, what is the level of attention or the quality of attention being paid to that ad? There are also ad blockers to consider. These are highly accessible and available, and we know that youth use them most frequently. There are some estimates that show that youth use up to 40% of youth use ad blockers. Multitasking is something that is actually sometimes celebrated in our society, but the fact of the matter is it divides our attention and it decreases the quality of attention that we're paying to any given task. There's research that shows that teens engage in an average of 9 hours a day on entertainment media. So this is separate from the time they spend online for school or homework. And that same research has shown that between 29 and 40% of these hours are spent multitasking. It's easier than ever in our digital environment. If an ad pops up, to multitask. If an ad pops up, you can switch tabs, you can preoccupy yourself with some other content for the duration of whatever ad that you wanted to skip or avoid. There are also devices to consider. So Benji mentioned in the beginning of this presentation that teens have access, almost all teens have access to one or more devices. And so what we end up seeing is a lot of devices are used as a second screen. So even if a teen is streaming their favorite television show on their TV, once an ad pops up, they're likely pulling up their cell phone to distract themselves for the length of time that it takes for an ad to complete, and vice versa. And none of that is to even mention our own limited attention spans. And so there was a cartoon that on this slide that hopefully once we share slides, you'll be able to see because it's pretty funny. It shows a group of people in a meeting, and actually that might be the most foreign element of this cartoon, an in-person meeting. But there's a gentleman on the left, and he's holding a goldfish bowl, and he's saying that I read that the average consumer has a lower attention span than that of a goldfish. And by the way, a goldfish's attention span is purportedly 9 seconds long. His colleagues are all on a digital screen. Most of them are not looking at him directly, but there is one woman who responds and she says, "I'm sorry, did you say something?" So thus illustrating that even within a professional setting, we can have, it can be a challenge to focus our attention. I'm sure that doesn't apply to anyone here. Okay, so I can keep going. It seems like the slides are still having trouble, but I do want to plug that we have some really fun GIFs and animations to share that will hopefully show up once we're able to share the deck.
Maribel, I'm going to try to just pull up the slides on my side. I know that one video is not going to work, but I think some of the other GIFs will work. Can you
Okay.
tell me what slide you're on, and I'm going to give it a whirl?
Yeah, so we should be on slide 21.
All right, let's give this a shot.
It feels appropriate. We're talking about digital challenges.
Right?
Why
Here's a
would it?
digital challenge for you, Maribel. You're doing great. Wait, let's see. Let me try to, can you see that?
Yes. Although I think actually we are on the slide numbers might have shifted. Oh, because of the addition in the beginning. So keep
Tell me
going.
where.
One more. Here we go. And this is one of the GIFs that we are excited to share. Okay, so thanks for troubleshooting really quickly, Michael. But to dive back in, the FDA has taken several different approaches to try to ensure that we can capture the attention of our audience. And so one of those approaches is taking advantage of forced view. So what I mean by forced view is a non-skippable ad. And so we'll employ this either for a forced view for the entirety of an ad. So the entire ad must be viewed in order for the teen to consume the content that they want to watch, or we could use a partially forced view. So for example, a teen would have to watch the first six seconds of the ad, and then they would have the option to skip it. But of course, this is not always, it's not practical or feasible to have all of our ads as forced view. And so we've had to complement this tactic with other tactics to suit our digital environment. One of those is creating shorter form ads. So if you think about traditional television, oftentimes ads are 15 seconds or 30 seconds, sometimes longer. Some infomercials are longer, as an example. But on digital, we try to keep our ads at longest at 15 seconds for the most part. But more frequently, our ads are 6 seconds or 10 seconds long. And so this has really forced us to tighten our narratives and to deliver our messages more quickly, which leads into another approach that we've taken, which is changing our narrative structure. So if you think about a traditional television ad, there's a storyline or a narrative that develops so that the punchline or the twist or whatever the intended message is often delivered towards the end of the ad. However, because of limited attention spans, and especially within a crowded and competitive digital environment, we have tried to ensure that we deliver our messages earlier, so that if a teen's attention wanes or they aren't watching the entirety of our ad, they have a higher chance of receiving our message. We've also done a lot to adapt our creative so that it feels more native to whatever platform we are working on. And so this really means that we are avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach. So instead of creating a single ad and distributing it among every platform that we are active on, we try to suit or tailor the creative to the strengths of that particular platform. So as an example, on TikTok, we know that first-person narrative formats tend to work really well. And so we really lean into that on TikTok. There are some platforms that have unique features like Snapchat. And so we'll create, lenses and filters specifically for that unique Snapchat environment. We've also really embraced working with influencers and other engagement-focused tactics. And there are a lot of benefits for working with influencers, including they really help extend our reach, and they help lend a credibility to our message because their followers have already stated by following an influencer, there's sort of a stated interest in what they have to say. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these next few slides, I'm going to cover a couple of specific examples for some of the different approaches that I just quickly outlined. The first of which is adapting our creative. So last year, this is an example of a custom program that the Real Cost e-cigarette campaign developed with Adult Swim. It's a custom program partnership, And our team at FDA worked with the animators of Rick and Morty to develop an ad vignette where vaping becomes one of Rick's evil experiments. But what's notable is that they did this because we were able to work with the show's animators, they did it in the style and the animation of the actual show. So it looked like an extension of the show. So whereas in the past, we might have just aired ads on Adult Swim's TV block, with the launch of the new season, we really wanted to adapt our approach to be more digital first. And so we launched this ad vignette for along with the new season across their entire digital ecosystem. So on their social sites and video platforms, on their mobile game, and so on. It was really importantly, it was an opportunity for us to take advantage of the attention that teens were already paying to this program and the excitement they had for the launch of the new season. And we were doing it where they were talking about the new season and where they were expressing their excitement for it. Teens really love Rick and Morty, and they already engage with the program on social media and across their digital fan ecosystem. And so it was really a chance for us to meet these teens where they already are and where they're already interested and engaged. This ensured that we were everywhere the teens were discussing the show, and we were also able to deliver our message through the program directly in the style and with the credibility of the Rick and Morty brand. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is our second example, working with influencers. So in addition to these sort of more elaborate 360 custom programs that we were able to put together with media partners, we also work with individual influencers to develop messages that they can share on their own social media accounts. I do want to mention that we select influencers based on their relevancy to our target audience. So they'll be different from campaign to campaign. So an influencer we select for the Real Cost Cigarette campaign will not necessarily be an influencer that works with the Real Cost e-cigarette campaign or Fresh Empire or any number of our other campaigns. Here, with this particular example, we selected Austin for the Real Cost Cigarettes campaign because of his edgy persona and his drumming. And we did this because we felt that they really aligned with our audience's passion points. While Austin has nearly 400,000 followers, which is a healthy following, I do want to mention that influencers do not have to be a high cost tactic. And in fact, some of the most impactful influencers are often what we call micro influencers. So those who have tens of thousands of followers or even fewer. They tend to be more engaged with their audience and can have more sway among their particular niche audience, which can actually end up promoting more engagement. Typically, when we work with influencers, we just ask them to highlight a tobacco message, and we're really only reviewing for the accuracy of the science in that message. But what we really want is for them to create a message from their unique perspective so that it feels more authentic and it sounds like it's really in their voice, because of course their followers can see through if that's not the case. So I think, Michael, you said the video won't work, but I can at least read the caption. And so Austin wrote, "Even smoking just a little bit opens the door to addiction. Don't lose your freedom to cigarettes. I found mine in music, and I love sharing that with all of you. This is what freedom looks like." And there's a no smoking emoji sign, hashtag the real cost, and he tags the campaign. So you can see here, he really juxtaposed his love of music and sense of freedom with the loss of control that smoking cigarettes would force on him. And so to describe the video, Austin's sort of his talent, I guess, or his interesting twist is that he has, on top of these drums, you can see there are some paint squirt bottles, and he takes them and he pours them on the drum set, and then so that when he starts to get into his music, the paint sort of bounces off of the drums, and it's kind of accentuates the beat and adds sort of more it makes the whole clip more animated and more alive. And it's to actually a really fun effect. So I guess I will just close to say, within this most recent round of work we conducted with Austin and some other influencers on the Real Cost Cigarettes campaign, this resulted in a higher engagement rate. We saw a higher number of comments. And more importantly, we saw a higher number of on-topic comments and more positive comments. So it really demonstrated how receptive the audience was, his followers and our other influencers, his followers were to this message. So we just covered two of the challenges, two of the digital challenges, but there are many more. We would love to continue the conversation, but for now, I will pass it back to Jen to highlight some key takeaways and take us home.
Thank you, Mary Bell. And thank you so much for keeping poised and moving on despite losing your visuals. I would like to ask all the panelists to come back on. I think I began the webinar by saying, as a program that focuses on youth, this is central for us to understand. And if you are sitting back thinking, I am dealing with adults and I don't have to worry about this, let me share a stat that we got from Nielsen last year, which is that 71% of cable and broadcast viewers are the age of 50 and above, meaning 29% are 50 and below. So this is coming for you, even if you're working with adults. So I'm going to start with some questions we got from the registration. And I'm going to start with Suzanne. We talked a lot about, maybe you could talk a little bit about the advantages that digital offers over broadcast TV for public health campaigns and maybe some negatives.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many advantages for digital. And first and foremost, it is so much more affordable right now than some of our linear TV and more traditional methods of reaching our targets. TV prices are actually at an all-time high, even with large year-long commitments. And with digital, you can get significant reach and frequency online with really small budgets. So that's number one. Secondly, and related to number one, is you get access to high quality content partnerships. As you saw with that example from Marvel or Rick and Morty, we were able to align ourselves with really important content for our target without even touching a TV buy. And it made it more meaningful, more resonant, and more 360. We were able to hit so many more touch points around Rick and Morty content than just having TV alone. It's also more targeted. I think we talked a lot. I know Maribel and I did talk a little bit about how it's more targeted, and many platforms do allow you to buy only the very specific target you're looking for. And when we do this, we think not only about demographics, but passions and psychographics as well. If you think about it, moms are even more easily reached online than even in TV, because today's moms, especially post-COVID or in COVID, there is no time to watch TV, but she is still on her phone as much as possible. Another example is customization. And Maribel talked a little bit about how we're doing this, where we're able to pair specific creative with specific targets, which is far more easy to do than putting out a piece of creative that's created for a specific target, and hopefully they see that in a more shared environment. It's more inclusive. I talk about internally, even at FCB, that digital has really democratized the availability of media to everybody. At this point, linear cable TV is the most expensive media for everybody to support in their households. If you have cable, I still do. I love it. I can't get rid of it. But think about what it's costing, right? And when you've got a household that may have more limited resources, they are definitely prioritizing cell phone and Wi-Fi over cable television, because they're able to get that very same content once they have their Wi-Fi and broadband. So those are just a few of the advantages of digital.
Thank
But
you.
yeah.
Yeah, and let me turn it turn it over to Mary Bell. I think we also got a lot of questions about how how can digital target special populations, or are some populations left out when you're focusing on digital?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So, and I'll say actually one of the advantages of digital is that we're actually able to, we talked a lot about tailoring, and that's absolutely sort of related to my response, and that's that we're able to take advantage of digital to tailor our reach and our content to get to more specialty or more niche or more vulnerable populations. There are all sorts of communities or places that people can congregate online based upon their specific interests or identities or so on. And so as long as you're able to identify what are the places that your specific population of interest, where are they specifically, as long as you can identify those places, you can develop a plan to reach them there. I do also want to highlight that at FDA, this is something we've given a lot of thought to in particular, and we've implemented and managed several campaigns that had to deal with very specific or more vulnerable populations. And so as an example, one campaign that we recently ran was This Free Life campaign. It was targeted towards young adults, young LGBT young adults who socially smoke. And through the very specific targeting capabilities that are allowed on digital, we are able to develop tactics and strategies that specifically targeted some of the subpopulations within this overall target audience. So we were able to create strategies that specifically reached gay cisgender males, specific strategies that reached bisexual lesbians, for example. And so it's really, there are a lot of advantages for digital to ensure that we don't leave any important segments of our population behind.
Thank you. And Benji and Mary Bell and Suzanne, please join in. I think we also received a lot of questions around, if you have a more limited budget, how can you maximize digital buys? Do you have other tips and tactics you can share?
That's a great question, because it's something we're faced with across a lot of different industries and clients. But when it comes to maximizing your budget, it really there's not a simple answer, a simple solution, but two suggestions I would probably give as a media strategy expert. The first one would be in tapping into influencers. As Mary Bell just mentioned, influencers have a lot, especially micro influencers. There's a whole spectrum now of you don't have to have the Kylies, the Jenners. There's a whole plethora of micro influencers at maybe the lower, smaller spectrum that are affordable and do reach these special opportunity audiences that we really want to connect with, that Mary Bell just mentioned, that have a high comp with the people we're trying to reach and have a big following there. So often it's a very inexpensive, but also a very authentic way, especially if you're trying to put a message out there that appeases and seems authentic and is read by consumers or by the other side as being authentic. Micro-influencers are a really great way to do that, and they're very mostly cost-effective as well. A second suggestion I would have is what we like to call an FDA when we're planning, going into planning, is bigger, better, fewer approach, which is rather than spreading ourselves just so thin, right, and just showing up everywhere, because a lot of the times with these public messaging, public health messaging, where we are trying to spread awareness on an issue or trying to address something, right? So everyone thinks spray and shout is the go-to approach sometimes. We've learned that it's actually better to focus in on the partners that really successfully move and push the needle with our teen audience and work with them more closely. That's why you see things like Marvel and Rick and Morty. We went so deep with them last year, is because that's the content, as Suzanne mentioned, that teens are naturally engaging with. So we're actually kind of getting them to read our messaging, and they're actually enjoying our messaging. And so it sounds easy, not everybody can work with Marvel or Rick and Morty, of course, but there's ways around. As you see, we didn't actually use Rick and Morty. We used like a different animation style as Rick and Morty, so it felt authentic and organic to the audience that was watching. There's ways around it that you can kind of find loopholes, and I would just suggest if you have a partner that has all of these IPs, tap into it, ask them, have the conversation with them about what else they can provide for you, because often there's package deals and you can get a lot more when you push harder on your partners. Very media answer of me.
Thank you. And I know we're going to turn it over now to Liz, who can start reading some of the questions from the Q&A.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks for everyone for submitting their questions. I will do my best to summarize across some of the questions and try my best to also address things that have not yet come up yet to date in the discussion. So first question, open to the group. Any advice for how to approach or start to conceptualize what the right kind of collaborations with media might be like, and or certain influencers? So, if you're starting something new, there's so many options available. Any advice for how to start that process of making a decision to pursue one thing over another?
I can start if you want me to.
Yeah, you go, Jeff.
I think, in the past, we have had other targets like LGBT youth or rural boys who are at risk for smokeless. And sometimes you just have to do research with the audience to understand their passion points. So for example, for smokeless, we were able to, there's a lot of interest in football and sports. And so we tapped into coaches. And there are high school coaches, and we were able to leverage that in micro influencers, but also, platforms. There are digital platforms that focus on sports like Huddle. The same thing for the LGBT campaign. I think at one point we realized, we were really struggling with a certain subpopulation, and cooking was one of the passion points that had overlap. And so we were able to do that. Those were very low level micro influencers. So you have to kind of think out of the box. It's not as simple as like, MTV is going to be my go-to because they reach all youth. You have to find where they are.
Great. I was also going to add to that from a media standpoint, there's ways like if you're trying to get onto TikTok, or if there's platforms that you're wary of, there's ways that you can test and kind of see. Like I said before, with Marvel and Rick and Morty, the only reason why we've gone so deep with them in the past year is because we have all the historical learnings that tell us that's where teens are and that's where they're communicating. And so there are tests, you have to kind of test the waters first before you obviously create a comic book or create a content series of your own, but there's ways in.
Thanks so much. All right, we'll keep us rolling here. So a couple times throughout the presentation today, we heard some about all of the possible metrics, digital metrics that can be used to help guide, where a campaign, where messaging is going. I think we can all acknowledge that measurement and evaluation is quite a large area to address, and one that we probably can't do adequate justice to today in the short amount of time that we have. But in light of some of the interest here, are there just a couple examples that we can mention that help point to how we can measure success of what we're doing?
Well, I can answer from KPIs. For media perspective and performance, we're always looking at things like clicks. I will say there's a whole list of jargon that I'm not going to, flood you guys with, but there are a lot of different ways that you can start to look at, especially engagement metrics, which for a lot of, pushing out a communication message, you really want your audience to be engaging with what you're trying to say. And so we do put a lot of focus on those, what we call engagement metrics, which again are like familiarity, recall, even in focus groups when it comes to, Suzanne and her team with creative concepts, we are already kind of looking out in focus groups for what are they saying about the ad? Those are, and obviously we can't put that number on a big slide and kind of show it off, but those are the things we look for that tell us that we are making an effect with teens.
Yeah, I can add, I think an easy answer is really think about the goals of your work. And so accordingly, based upon whatever you're trying to achieve, there may be some different metrics or indicators that you can use to give you information about how well you're doing or give you feedback on your work. So for example, if you have a quit line that you're trying to drive people to, of course, there are numbers you can look at. Who's going to the quit line? Are people looking at your ad? What's the conversion rate? There are those types of things. And even when I mentioned our influencers example, we do look at a lot of these process metrics, so I mentioned in particular our engagement rate. We are looking at the number of comments, how many are on topic, how many are positive. These are all indicators that we're using to learn about the execution, hopefully the successful execution of our work. It'll help us maybe optimize what we do, or maybe it'll tell us this was confirmed that yes, we selected the right influencer to work with, or maybe we need to select a different type of influencer because drumming and paint actually wasn't an ideal combination for our audience. I think the more complicated answer, and that we really don't have time to get into, is that there's still a lot of really big questions around how do we truly measure the impact of our work on digital. And it's not something that's unique to us at FDA or unique to people engaged in public education work. It's also a big question among folks in the digital marketing industry. And there are a lot of sort of systemic challenges and barriers to being able to get really high quality information about that. And so I'll leave it there unless anyone else wants to.
The only thing I would add is that, if you're struggling through digital measurement, please reach out. We're happy to collaborate. It's such a huge issue, and we don't have all the answers. We're trying to figure it out piece by piece.
Thanks so much. So an additional question, I think what some are grappling with are this idea of digital being democratized, and that is a really compelling point. I think we know that smart devices have high penetration rates, at least in the United States at this point, and that's great to see. But there's still some conversations about teens that might not be as active in the digital space, or perhaps still not have access to internet at home. Any thoughts on how, or related to strategies that can complement, a digital approach? If there are, organizations that are trying to reach teens in this type of environment, which might not be so digitally connected, any thoughts or advice for how they might approach that situation?
I think it's about being well-rounded, right? And it's not thinking about digital as one place, right? Being digital is completely integrated. And I think, Benji did show on his slide that most teens do absolutely have access to phones, Wi-Fi, and all sorts of devices. So I think they have it. Now, are a lot of teens active, perhaps on social? No. More at-risk teens they also tend to be voyeuristic, right? They're there, but they're not engaging, but that's okay, right? And I think you think about a communications program is 360. It's leveraging influencers, it's leveraging social, it's leveraging streaming radio. I don't want to forget the power of digital radio and Spotify and Pandora. And it doesn't mean you can't be on more traditional platforms. We are. The real cost, we still have a TV buy. In 2019, when kids were in school every day, we had posters in schools, in school bathrooms, because that's where vaping was happening. So I think by no means are we saying that it's digital all the time and only. We consider it based on teens' behavior, the epicenter of all that we do, but by no means do we think about it, just digital in a vacuum, for sure.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's
Yeah.
really helpful.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So additional thoughts are requested related to the length of digital advertising messages. I think trying to, pull together a detailed, nuanced, potentially complex health information, health message in 15, 10, or 6-second spots is quite challenging. Any advice for folks that are thinking about how to operate within this constrained time availability on digital sources?
I think I covered in my slide that you have to be able to be flexible. Now, if you have a message that can't be delivered in 6 seconds, well, don't buy that. Go with an influencer where your target's going to give you the benefit of more time, right? I think you have to be flexible, and we've been really lucky with FDA because we have a really strong relationship with the Office of Science, right? And they allow us different amounts of time and specificity based on the ad unit. But if it is more specialized, just don't use a 6. Use something that really can benefit and complement the message. And especially if your target is not teens and it's somebody older, don't be afraid to use the media to drive to a site or drive someplace where that information is more available, where that audience will give you the benefit of more time, whether that's a blog, a website, even a YouTube channel, even a social platform. I think my guide is just like, if it doesn't work, don't use it. Don't feel pressured.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to briefly add that, and this is something I think Suzanne already touched on, but you may also benefit by thinking about your content in its entirety instead of individual ad units. So you have the opportunity to extend or build on your message in different places and with different ads. And so if you really feel like you can't adequately address something in a 6-second ad, use it to complement something else that you have. Suzanne in her slides, she really emphasized we like to keep message consistency. So maybe the creative wrapper or the execution of what we're saying is will differ greatly based upon where we are, what platform we're on, but we're always keeping something consistent so that our content in its entirety is complementing one another.
Liz, I was just going to say maybe one more question and then turn it back over to Michael.
Great. Okay. This one hopefully will be a little shorter, but can we quickly share for folks that are watching virtually just where they could potentially view some of the ads that we talked about, any accounts, channels we can point them to if they're interested in seeing some of our work?
Well, Marvel's all on YouTube. You can watch all of the channels on YouTube. Watch them one at a time so we get those views up. But yeah, watch every chapter. And then Rick and Morty is also on Adult Swim. I think it's still housed there, but I don't know if the team has on hand any of the URLs that we can send through in this chat.
I think we have a Real Cost YouTube channel, but some of the customized programs like Rick and Morty, we don't own the rights to because it's owned by Rick and Morty. So those are a little bit more limited.
Thank you. I'll just wrap up questions and just say thank you so much for everyone that submitted questions. Really enjoyed reading them, and we're happy, be happy to follow up if there's anything we didn't address. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I appreciate everyone hanging with us as we work through a little technical difficulties. It wouldn't be a good webinar if we didn't have a few of those. And really nice job, Maribel, for managing through, as I know we were frozen on the side. And I'm just putting your email up here. I know that folks may have questions for other folks too, but maybe if I can just kind of point folks to Maribel's email here, if you have additional follow-up questions. I know there were a lot submitted through the Q&A, so I really appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions, and it's such a great discussion. Just a really quick plug at the end here, and a big thank you to everyone who participated. Thanks to our speakers, thanks to Westat for hosting us. As I mentioned, here are a few ways just to get involved in the society if you're not already. You can become a member at the website. On our website, it's completely free right now for individuals. Also encourage you to follow us on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you have any additional questions around the society, you can feel free to reach out to me, and my email is here. And I think with that, we will say goodbye and thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.